Welcome. Welcome to Move to Learn, the Handspring webinar for manual therapists and movement practitioners. Today is Monday, September 18th, 2023, and we are beyond thrilled to welcome Lauri Nemetz, the author of The Myofascial System in Form and Movement. Before introducing Lauri, let's take a look at the slide that explains how things work. This presentation features copyright material from the book. Please note this cannot be shared anywhere without permission from the publisher. The chat is on, so do say hello and tell us where you're joining from. This event includes a discussion and visuals from the book, guided embodiment experiences, and will end with a Q&A. As Lauri continues with her presentation, please put your questions in the Q&A and, of course, your comments in the chat. We welcome your questions and ask that you submit these using the Q&A button on your screen. Although we aim to finish on the hour, Lauri says she's made room in her schedule to continue for 10 minutes after the hour to ensure that she answers as many questions as we have. This webinar is being recorded, and Handspring will share a link to it in the follow-up email. We're also streaming live on YouTube. We draw your attention to the disclaimer that this discussion is for informational and illustrative purposes only and is not meant to impart medical or therapeutic advice or instruction. For the embodiment experiences, Lauri suggests that you have a mat and a yoga block, or if not a yoga block, then a hardcover book would do just fine. Now it's my privilege to introduce you to Lauri via her bio. Lauri Nemetz is a guide for explorers. She sustains a healthy curiosity for seeing and learning things in new ways. Lauri is an adjunct professor at Pace University, a visiting associate professor in the Department of Physical Medicine at Rush University Medical Center, and an anatomical dissector on several projects, including the Fascial Net Plastination Project. Lauri was a senior faculty member and dissection assistant for Anatomy Trains. Lauri is a New York licensed creative arts therapist, a board-certified dance movement therapist, a certified yoga teacher, yoga therapist, and stop Pilates instructor. She loves creating spaces for growth and learning. I just learned in our rehearsal that Lauri has recently started a PhD program at the University of Eastern Virginia Medical Center. You see, I'm just floored with this. Can't even spit it out. A PhD program with Eastern Virginia Medical, where she will focus on contemporary human anatomy education, looking at the dissection, perception, and art history. Lauri, welcome to Move to Learn.
Thank you. It's so good to get to be with you, even in this format again. This is great.
Absolutely. And Lauri, fill us in. What was it that drew you to the PhD program? And this sounds so a unique exploration, even for you.
Yeah, actually, I think too, I've been waiting for a long time to find the right fit for a PhD program. And I'll be close to 60 by the time I finish my PhD, but you know, you're never too old to start new things. And I actually have been wanting to figure out the right place to put things together. And I think, as you know about me, I love conversation. I love the intersection between different communities, between different people. And so I really enjoy kind of welcoming in, getting to use my hat from the anatomy world with my fascia world, with my movement world, with all of that, And I was an art history major way back in college. So it was just kind of a love to put this all together and start to think about how I might combine this for the next thing I'm exploring. So yeah.
The book you've created over, I know, a life journey and many years. You've been very inclusive in this book, inviting many contributors. And I find that this book, with the fascia world in form and movement, is also a kind of a roadmap to the evolution of our field.
Well, thank you so much. And yeah, you'll see a little bit as in a little bit, share some slides. I actually, when I started doing the book, and I've talked to you a little bit about this as well, I felt so lucky that along the pathway, I've met so many incredible people. And, we bumped back into each other. I think it's been it's at least 10 years, Elizabeth, maybe a lot longer, that we've intersected. And when I started to work on the book, I was like, well, I can summarize some of these stories with all these amazing people, but why not just ask them? So I also, besides doing a lot of the book myself, there are places where I invite in all of these special people. So, Robert Schleif, Neil Thies, Carla Stecco, all of these different names that you may know. And then some of the ones we know more in the movement world, the Michal Dalcours, the Mike Fitches, all of that, Rebecca Rothstein, all these different people that are in doing great work, and I wanted to bring them into the conversation. So there's a lot of little spaces that I'm hoping in the book too, that you're flipping through it, and some, you can read it front to back, but it's kind of fun to flip through it and find a spot you land on or resonate with, and then go down that rabbit hole, maybe go into their workshop. I have a whole section that Chris Frederick did from Stretch to Win, and you may go, wow, I really like that sequence. Maybe I'll go off and study with him. So I'm encouraging that, because that's the way I learn too. I go off and pick up all of these little pieces. So yeah, I appreciate that comment.
Yes. Your book is just visually spectacular. Every page has a new visual surprise, like, oh, I didn't expect that. Tell us how you chose the images and how you've collected them over the years.
It's a really good question. And because of my own art background and art history and love of the visual, I knew this book had to be visual. And it's sometimes hard to translate movement into written form, but I think sometimes seeing a visual, not just a visual of somebody doing movement, but a visual that explains a concept in a way. Or, I have a picture of me time-lapsed kayaking, and you can see the shape form of that. So there's a visual that immediately starts to get the wheels turning. The pictures were pulled in from all different sources. That's the other reason I asked so many of my friends, and I knew they had really good pictures and images of their own work, or sometimes I know. And I was like, ooh, if I can get your image in here as well, that says what I'd like to do right away. So sometimes I'd be seeing something, and I'd immediately call up somebody and say, hey, by the way, I'm working on this book. Could I get the rights to that image to pull in? Because it's just perfect. So that's how I got a lot of it. There are some of me in there because I'm a cheap model and I was readily available. So there I am as well. But also I wanted different bodies, different, people of all sorts. So that's why I also pulled in all sorts of other people. So you would see different shapes, colors, sizes, all of that in there, because that's who we all are. And then as far as some of the art ones, I really searched back to find some of the images. Some of them you'll see around. The Bougerie is classic anatomy images. I'll show you that image coming up. But I also searched for more obscure anatomy images that also I felt like showed off myofascial continuities really well, or had a shape to them that described what I wanted to talk about. So I actually pulled from so many sources, and I had a running file of where I wanted it to go, and just pulling it in from all over. But that was a labor of love to have all these images. And I really was grateful to Handspring to be right on board from the very beginning of printing this in color and to have that backing behind it. They got the idea, even for the image of the front cover too, that kind of resonated with a lot of the things I already had going on in the book. So, yeah.
Well, with that scrumptious teaser, let's just dive in.
Okay, I'll do a little bit of screen sharing. So hopefully everybody can see. Let me do that and let me know. Oh, let me back up a little bit here so we can start from the beginning. So I just, first of all, want to thank Handspring for inviting me in. This has been, obviously, as you said, a journey. And I did some of this so you can see the flip through if you don't have the book already. And I'm going to show you images throughout of the book. But as you can see, it's even kind of color coded in different places. And the richness of those visuals is meant to grab you into different parts of the book. So like I said, you're welcome to read it front to back, but you're also welcome to thumb through it like in between with working with people and getting bits and pieces of different ideas. So that was important to me. I have some images there of me too. I'm as much a dissector as I am a mover, as I am everything else. So I come from this with all of those lenses. And like I said, the richness of all the people that kind of came into it along the ride too. So here we go too. I have another thing you can be flipping through, but I wanted to lay this out. So those of you that don't have the book, who want to kind of see how it's laid out, it's kind of divided into a part one, which is a lot of the more kind of science and structural background of fascia, and then a part two, which gets into more of those movement applications. Throughout the whole book, you can see these things which are kind of visually landmarked. Breakout boxes are kind of a thought idea from many of my guests. Movement lab means, hey, get up, try this out. And it may be something more complicated. It may be something really simple. Those are all important in there. Thought box is just like a new idea that you might not have thought of before. And again, a lot of those come from my guests. I include in these really rich voices who I've been really lucky to know. And then design principles, because I do feel so much of fascia, so much of thinking about myofascial system, which is a really interesting word to me, scales down, but also scales up. And I really became interested, as I was working on this book, in things like, our tensegrity shape also looks a lot like our shape that we use in Laban movement analysis to describe movement. So there's overlaps in where we can think about systems. So that's a little bit of that too. So as we go on, this was thanks to you, Elizabeth. I have to give you a big shout out, because you talked about, just as we were chatting early on about the book, how much I was mentioning all of these people were important to me. And this isn't quite everybody who's in the book. This is just the vast majority of some of those faces and people who are important to me. And like I said, some of those you may recognize are familiar faces. Some of them may be brand new to you. And that's part of my joy, and also introducing you to some of my friends who have influenced me in different ways. So all this richness of all these different people and connections have fed into this book. And like I said, sometimes you'll hear their own voices, but they've all been big and influential in my writing. So I could spend an hour just talking about each and every one of them, but we have things to do. We'll go onwards. During the kind of the height of the pandemic, I really was thinking a lot about storytelling and how we story tell anything, whether it's in a book, whether it's in a lecture, or just gathering together. And I thought this was so fascinating. I found out the Decameron, which was written in Italy during the time of the Black Plague, described a number of people getting together outside of the main cities in the countryside and telling stories together. And I just somehow that concept hooked on to me so strongly. And even in anatomy, even in movement, we're telling stories. It's my perception or a general perception that comes in. And I love this quote from Barry Lopez, very influential person for me, who talked about everything is held together with stories. That's all that's holding us together, stories and compassion. And I often give this quote when I'm teaching a dissection lab at the very beginning of lab. To even remember, whatever we're seeing in a body, I mean, for dissection, that we are interpreting a story. We don't know the full scope of everything else, but we're doing a little piece of things. So even my book, and this is where I love Handspring too for these sorts of things, because they give us an opportunity to give a little slice of the story. So as we go along, this also gets mentioned in the book really early on. It's basically, this is a little shout out to a book called The Lost Words, and it's by Robert Macfarlane. And he basically took the idea that the Oxford English Dictionary was taking out all sorts of words from their kids' dictionary that were words like dandelion or words that had to do with nature. And he was really disturbed by this, because if we take away these words, we don't have the ability to see them, to understand them, to recognize them. So I think it's kind of the same in anatomy. What we don't see or understand, we can't always perceive. So it's sometimes so important, the work that we do, especially in myofascial anatomy, with how that changes how people move or how they interpret their own health. The book in the corner, and you can move your own screen to have me out of the way if you need to, is from, Vesalius, which is well known to many of us. But you have these figures, which for their time period, very unusual to see them in lifelike movement along the Italian countryside. And actually, a lot of those pages, if you put them together page by page by page and lay them out, they're moving all along a continuous Italian countryside. And the other thing that this did, which is really interesting, is it showed us a new way of thinking about these connections in the body. So before we had a way to think about it, to see it, we didn't always have awareness. So you mean the more and more we do in fascial anatomy, this changes things. And this is why I'm kind of looking towards art dissection, art history perception in my own thesis. And threads of this have come through with early poster presentations. You see the image on the left is by Michelangelo, the famous sculpture of David. And then the other one is a Gego by contemporary of Buckminster Fuller, who was, we don't know if they intersected, but this was from a recent museum visit in New York. And this reminds us of the structure of fascia. So we start to have these overlaps of ideas or ways of seeing things that change then how we move through them. So I'll explain more about that, or we can dialogue more about that as we go. This is kind of the big aha image for a lot of us. You were part of the Fascia Net Plastination project too. And part of that was creating individual pieces that got highlighted, like this one on the right. And part of it was creating that overall Freya, who was the first full body plastinate that highlighted fascia, not the muscles, not the bone, not the nervous system, but fascia. And all of those are important. But when we forget about one part of it, we kind of lose our awareness of it. So this image on the left, which was kind of some inspiration for the image on the right that got done, has influenced so many of us because those fascial septums have just as much importance as the pockets of muscle inside them. So when we change our viewpoint of what we're seeing, we start to think about continuities differently, about our movement quality differently, of how we inform not only ourselves, but loved ones and students, patients, whoever we work with. So I think that's kind of a big aha moment. And I got so interested in some of this that a while back on the left was a decellularized kidney that I'd done in lab, where I stripped away everything but the extracellular matrix. If you look at the image on the right, this was taken by a friend of mine, Jarrett Kaplan, good Pilates teacher who you may know as well. But he took this leaf picture after we had been in lab one time together. And it's the same thing. It's the structure, it's the extracellular matrix scaffolding of that leaf. And how cool is it that we have so many similarities, our own body structure to what we see outside in nature. And this is part of that scaling of systems, micro to macro. So, we take a look at things like even oranges can be a metaphor for how our fascia is. A lot of us have used this. I decided to invite Dr. Rebecca Pratt to be the one to give this little thought box about how that orange or those septums are kind of like our big, large, muscular fascial septums. And then the individual teeny tiny segments are like the additional fascial wrapping around in bundles around cells and all of that, so that we have this same scaling of systems and very similar system, both in the rest of the world as we do in understanding our own body. The more we have images too like this, we can explain things to, again, other people that we work with that may start to make those ahas and make things click. This happens to be another image. This is basically extracellular matrix, so the fascia matrix of a cactus. So again, kind of feels similar to stuff we know. It resonates because it's a natural image. So it's something, again, to get those wheels turning. And of course, we find things like body systems as far as fractals or the way the body divides up, whether it's circulatory or nervous. That's the images. That was from Vladimir, who is head at the Plastinarium and Anatomy in Gubin, who worked with us on the Fascia Net Plastination project. But these systems too, like I said, they're important as well. We've seen nervous system. Gil Hadley's another one who's doing a very similar showing of his project in the nervous system now. We've seen circulatory system, but we hadn't seen so many images of fascia until Fascia Net Plastination project. So when we start to look at these differences, we again get a new insight, new ahas of body connection and not just separation. So, and you're in there too, Elizabeth. Yay for the exhibit that was first in Berlin of this. So then, I mean, in the book as well, pair a lot of images. This happens to be one from one of my own dissections with KMR Labs. Pair that with movement. Things like our IT band, as we know, doesn't get pulled into being until we start walking. Movement that is side to side, like a kettlebell swing, is a good way too to work on some of the stabilization. But when you see images like this from lab, you can see the beauty of those collagen fibers that are running two different directions primarily to reinforce, kind of like a packing tape or something. And it shows up different places in the body for different reasons. This makes sense. We've got to stand and balance upright, all those good things. So that's there. And then getting into, This is all still from the first part of the book. Getting into things too from some of my guests. This happens to be Animal Flow, which is Mike Fitch, as well as Michelle Delcourt, which was the creator of Viper. And I invited both of them, both of these beautiful images. There's a few more in the book, as well as some of their thought process. Because even as I'm telling you now, I can tell you the story of how they developed the movement, but I wanted to invite them to show you what they've done with it and also to talk about it. For example, Michelle Delcourt, he was training in Canada, some of the hockey players, and he's finding the kids that they trained in the gym were doing okay, but not as well as the kids coming just off the farm. And he figured out part of the reason why was that they had heavy loads of things they were always working with. You know, you put hay in different areas, you always have a variable load at a slightly different vector or angle. And this is really, really great for training fascia, because the more that you place in variations, you change your timing, you change your load, the more that you're going to be able to create that hot word these days in fascia, resiliency. So this is part of what we encourage for movement. And like I said, I explore it in ways, I have friends that explore it in all sorts of ways. And this just is lovely how many people are starting to branch out and create systems based off of some of the new thought processes in fascia. So right now, I'm going to stop a screen share with you for a moment so that we can do a little movement. I got to find my cursor. There we are. So come on up and move with me for a moment. We'll be doing a few things. This one, you don't need any props whatsoever. So from back in the day, I know, Elizabeth, you'll probably remember this. There used to be kind of a lot of swings, modern dance sequences. And these, you know, no matter whose system of arm lines you're following or anything else, these work really well with that, as well as the qualities of fascia. So if I'm doing even just a simple arm swing, and you can do this with me, I'm getting a lot of that continuity, the myofascial continuity. Now, I can do a little bit more to this to create more fascial qualities in this movement. I can bend my knees. So if I start doing this with it, I'm preloading in a different way, right? And then if you want to, go ahead, switch to the other side. So here I am, and you can play with this. You can do as much or as little as you want. You can also start to jump as you're going, preloading. As we know with fascia, if you preload and don't do anything for a little while, and you can try this now, it's hard to jump, right? You have spent too much time. But if you preload and then create that bounce, you've actually used your Achilles tendon a little bit better for preloading and creating fascial resiliency, which you can train. So if we take that same sequence, swing it across, add to it, around and back, maybe halfway back and up. Don't worry if you don't have that. We're just doing this lovely little part of it. Okay, modern dance sequence. And if you are lost here, you can try the other side. You can just keep swinging. That part as well is good. But let's say we wanted to add more to this, just so that the body isn't training right in planar motion. We could start to change where we go in space. I could start to change direction with almost everything that I do. So now I'm getting more possibilities in my movement. That also trains me better. So if I step off a curb and I suddenly find my foot going somewhere that I didn't expect, I've trained more of that into the body system. So it doesn't have to be complicated. You can keep it with this lovely little arm swing and then just go, all right, I'm going to change where I go with the rest of my body in relationship to that. Maybe I'll change it to be faster or slower. These sorts of things train in different possibilities myofascially for the body system. So I'm going to hop back in. Hopefully that made sense. Hopefully you had some fun bouncing around. Good. And let me go back. I'll screen share a little bit here again. That's in the book. You can kind of play with it. I also talk about emotional body as well, because my background is as a dance movement therapist. I'm licensed in New York, so I do have some of that emotional training in there, licensing as a psychotherapist. And this is where I find things, the overlap, really interesting. Same thing, emotional resilience needs different possibilities in movement. So think about it. And this is something Laban, who's used a lot by dance movement therapy as a profession, talked about. If you have different movement qualities, and let's say you're always in this very light and gentle movement, that's personality, can be an aspect. But if you can never access strong movement when you need it, that can be an issue, both emotionally as well as physically, as well as responsiveness. So we look also even in expressive movement for different possibilities in the body. So you may want to think about that too. If you're just playfully exploring any movement that you like to do, what would it be like to do it strong and with a lot of tension in the body? What would it be like to do it loose and very gentle and distal and soft? Can you use all of that? Because that also will train you myofascially as well. So going on from there, we're going to hop back to the floor for a moment. And we're going to, I'll stop my screen share again. Just want to talk about, and I realized I didn't bring this over with me last time I hopped to the mat. Hopefully you can hear me well enough. I'll do that this time. Better, right? Sorry about that last time. I should have realized. So we're going to come on down to the floor and just take something very simple. In our anatomy, we talk about a lot of times drivers of movement and how that can change things. So if you're down on the floor with me on your mat, and that you're in this nice little stance, and you take a pose like yoga, we call this half Hanuman, half split, just a little bit of a gentle lunge. Again, please adjust for anything that you need. I can work with my hamstrings a couple different ways to get the slide and glide around that compartment. If I just turn my leg and turn my foot out to the side, starting from the femur, but working itself down, and wave it out like a flag in the wind, and we're turning this out to the side, you'll feel one part of the leg, again, working against the other in one way. And let's just try that with the other leg. So same thing here. I'm turning the leg out just to feel that slide and glide in between things. All right, so let's come on back to the first side. Now it's a little different if from here I keep the leg straight, but use my hands or my torso as a driver and work that out to the outside of the leg. I feel different movement in there, but I'm also affecting that slide and glide. Try it on the other side, same thing. You're now using your upper body as the driver. So those aspects too, when we talk about movement, we like to think about too, what's initiating the movement and how that changes. Still working hamstrings in a way, but it changes the quality of the movement. We need both. We want to have both in there as we go so that we have different, again, possibilities. Even if, and you can come onto the back of your body with me here as well. If we take a leg up towards the ceiling and just do a little point and flex, of course, we're working the whole back of the leg, right? We can also do things like manipulating the back of the leg as we go. Much different sensation than just taking leg up and holding it. Here, we're actually working again, sliding and gliding of those different compartments. And if you want to take the other side, all those good things. So once we have these ideas in mind, we can play with that in different ways. So I'm going to hop on back and let's screen share again. Get through a little bit more and then we'll get to our questions too. So from here, let's hop on back. So that's in the book, things like that as well that can get your mind started. But I don't want to give you a whole, it's not a recipe book. It's a sparking book so that you can then create your own ideas and ahas from all of this. So that's why I'm going to get into a little bit of artwork. How do you look at people? What do you see? There's a lot of different systems out there for assessing movement that are great. But the more tools you have in your toolbox, even the better. So I even talk about looking sometimes at a person I'm working with from the viewpoint of art history. What do you see? What do you feel? What's its context? How do you place this? What category do you place this under? And how does time change what you're seeing in this body or system? The photo or the picture on the right actually happens to be what is called a meander mat. And these were popular for a while. I got too excited. They were popular for a while on social media. Hope you didn't get scared there at the noise. But they are a showing of a river changing shape over time. So you can start to see the pattern of things, but also the shifts and changes. And we all have that in our body. And I see it even in dissection lab, the remnants of, as far as when we get into dissection of what remains, where patterns may have originally gone, and maybe because of a surgery or something else, where the flow has changed. And again, it's not to think of it in a negative, it's to think of it too as how we deal with life. When I'm kayaking out on the Hudson River, I absolutely am very familiar with the feel of maps like this, how time changes pattern depending on what's in place. So just giving you a little idea. And along those lines with the river, I told you I had this picture. This was thanks to a local photographer, Barry Kittle, who I was literally coming off the water from leading a kayak trip. And he's like, could I put lights on your paddle? And we can see the pattern of your paddle as you're out in the Hudson. And even though I was tired and everything else, I'm not pretending to be the most elite kayaker. It was fascinating to me to see the shape form. In again, Laban people would talk about trace forms of the movement and what we can learn from that as well. So that again, where those patterns play. We talk about a lot myofascial anatomy that we're looking for oftentimes efficiency, for coordination, but also kind of a sense of gracefulness, whether you're a football player out on the field or a dancer or what have you. That's a high level of sophistication of coordination in the myofascial system. So just putting ideas out there. And I mean, things like this are in my book as well. I'd worked, as I mentioned, as a therapist for many, many years, working particularly with trauma. And this was a picture utilized with permission of a client that is anonymous. Her name had been changed in the article I published, as we do. But this was after 9/11 in the United States. And it wasn't until several years later, when I was starting to study a lot of this myofascial anatomy, that it hit me like, you could call it Tom Meyer's superficial frontline collapsing, or whatever you want to call in there. But this myofascial continuity of protection, of pulling inwards, was very apparent in her body shape. The trees along the pathway that I meander along every day also have the same DNA as this tree right next to it, but they shape differently, depending on the environmental input right to them. So we kind of do the same thing. And it's interesting to think about how we shape, but how we change from those shapes as well. And as I mentioned, I love old anatomy pictures. I look at a lot, and partly because they sometimes show us these connections in a different way than we're used to seeing. So on the image on the left, I just think this is such that clear connection of various people's lateral line. So you can see things like, you know, again, tibialis anterior to tensor, you know, to the IT band, tensor fasciolata, all of this coming up. But it's lovely that the image, these Escorche images, are shown moving. So we get that sense of what these bodies look like in movement. Likewise, we're looking at an antique picture of the diaphragm coming from up top and just seeing the volume of these things as well. So second half of the book, which I'll go through a lot quicker, focuses on a lot of movement, and again, has many of my guests coming in. So whether it's Chris Frederick that's up there, whether I'm talking about yoga, I have special guests, you know, in the Pilates chapter as well, to even talking about myofascial work in different stages of life. So in all of these too, we start to take some of the ideas and move it into different things that you might know. And then I push it a little bit further and talk about how environmental space affects us, both aesthetically as well as just on a very physical level. So I've studied too in different cultures, different styles, things like the European, the Gothic style of lifting up high and lengthening, very much the same aesthetic of this beautiful ballet dancer. This happens to be a friend of mine, Marilyn Miller, who is embodying that same cultural aesthetic of lift. And in different places, there's different things. I used to do folk dance for quite some time, as well as modern dance and other things. If you're really curious, that's me, the third person in with the striped skirt way back. But this is Macedonian folk dance. And this is fascinating to me now with my lens as an anatomist, because look at how much work we're doing, balance and proprioception. These dances were designed to be over these kind of rocky terrain. And a lot of folk dance practices what is needed in life. So they go on for a long time, but a lot of this very precise stepping, but then balance work is really interesting. Plus, you're in connection with people side to side in the body system. So I'm just throwing that in there. We're going to get up one more time, and then I'll have a few more slides before we'll chat. So let me let's get that block or your book, whatever you want to do. And we're going to come into, again, oops, center of the room. I'll make it a little easier to hear me once again. And just as we're here, we know fascia as well is highly proprioceptive. So things, again, like the retinacula around my ankle or around my wrist, it's there partly to tie things down, but it's also there as proprioception if I'm on something of an uneven surface. So if you stand, and again, please don't do so or take a lower block or do whatever you need to do for your own body. But if I take one block and hover 1 foot off the other side, I'm challenging my body system in a different way to organize side to side. I do have scoliosis, so I play with proprioception quite a lot too. But as I'm here, I can then, if I dip down to one side, come on up, dip down to the other side, I'm challenging myself in a different way than if I was just on solid ground. So that's on one side. Other side may look completely different because of how we work. The more we do challenges to our body system, again, the more we work towards that resiliency. Now, I could up the ante with closing my eyes, or maybe changing into different places as I'm on an uneven surface and balancing. So again, I invite people to play once we know some of the science, know some of the concepts, to play and see how we can take that into application no matter what you're doing movement wise. So let's come on back for the last few slides. And here we go. There we are. And then so this takes it out to how we do things in our larger space. So I'm just trying to make sure I'm not turning on my map to do something highly entertaining here. But I get out on the trail almost daily, usually daily. And I have a trail that I go on that's both gravel, grass, mud, unpaved, paved. And these different surfaces, particularly as I'm getting older, are useful to, again, creating some of that resiliency in the body. So I invite, again, different surface changes, different direction, different spatial use. If we're always going around a track the same way every single day, it's going to be hard for us, again, if we're faced with unusual surfaces. So that's part of that there too. And then this is the last slide that I have there. Before we go back to chatting and opening up to what you guys want to talk about. And this was basically at the very beginning of the year when the book came out. And I was grateful to get to do a book signing at Hudson Valley Books for Humanity, which is right in my little town here of Ossining, where, I got to invite people kind of just as we are doing now, both to move, to explore, to see a little lecture, and to ask questions as well. And you guys, all of you, you are part of this web now. We're all connected by these threads. We're kind of a system of ourselves. And the more that we share, more that we work, Robert Schleif sometimes talks about, in community, we should act like the tissue that we're studying, which works through connection. So that's something, like I said, that's been very important to me as we've gone along to welcome that in. So I'm going to stop the screen share for now here and invite you guys and Elizabeth to talk a little bit more as we're here.
Lauri, that was such an inspiring flow of flow of water, flow of space, flow of tissue. It was just gorgeous. And no surprise, questions are accumulating.
Yay, I love questions.
Specifically, Jane McKenzie asks, how do you maintain and or cue stability while swinging arms and jumping, etc.?
Well, as far as teaching people that lovely little sequence, how do you maintain it? Well, that's part of the point, is you might get a little bit off kilter. How do I personally do it? I think that comes with teaching over time, that you talk and walk and move and dance and do all of those things at the same time. Not sure if I'm getting, how do you cue stability? Okay, I'm reading your question too, so that I can do that. That's an interesting thing. Is it so bad too that we experience not pristine movement at first? So here's an interesting thing. Of course, like your clients too, if you're working with somebody who's increasing balance, you want them to stay safe. Falls are definitely one of the hardest things as people come into older age. But if you don't have a little bit of playfulness with that, you won't explore. So the thing is, oftentimes, here, I'll come back. I'll take this with me. I have oftentimes, I'm sitting on it, but I have one of these foam cushion boards. You've probably seen a million different people make them. I'm not endorsing any specific name here, because even if you're working with somebody here, just the same thing, you've changed the surface. it sometimes pulls them in. So I can do the same swing on here, and without even having to think about it, my body is trying to organize just so I don't fall over. So sometimes one way to do it is to almost seemingly make it more challenging first, because here I am on an unstable surface. I'm trying to figure out how that feels in my body. And then I'm like, okay, I've got that. Now let me take it onto solid ground. Oh, okay, I really got that. Much easier. So that's one way of approaching that. Hope that answers the question. Let me know if that's good for you. Yeah, okay.
Great. From Brian Donovan comes a compliment and a question. First, the compliment is excellent presentation, Lauri. I loved your book.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
And then Brian continues in the chat. Lauri, can you chat a bit about fascia and aging? That section of your book is something I would like to learn a lot more about.
Thank you. No, I appreciate that. It's something that, and I invited several guests in there too. Johannes Freeberg is doing quite a lot of that. He's in the book. Some of you know him in the fascia community. He's from Brazil. He was an Olympian at one point in his career, very interested in movement. And as he's aged, he's become interested in that topic too, of how do we age well? And a lot of this, you can look up some of his work too, because he's done a lot of interesting material on how to make ourselves, again, more resilient in different ways. Aging in general is kind of drying a lot of the tissues up in fascia. Doesn't have to be that way. So the more we move, the more we create some of that slide and glide, the healthier we remain. Been particularly interested for women. It's how I identify, but so I'm selfishly very invested in that as well. In some of the work that's coming out of Padua in Italy, Caterina Fede, Fede, is somebody who's studying hormones, particularly related to women. More, I think, is coming as far as men too as they age, but we know women go through quite significant changes, and how estrogen changes affect achiness in the myofascial body, affect slide and glide, affect all of those mobility things. So we're looking at that in different ways. Hope to do more in the future with that too, developing some of that content separately, because it's such an important area. I was listening to a podcast the other day where we're talking about in different countries, age expectancy, but then also the age of kind of viability of where that divide is. Italy actually has one pretty close to life expectancy and life of being able to, have a full enriched ability to get around. US, not so great right now. There's a gap. And so I'm interested, as I'm aging, as I have loved ones aging, to see that too. Where can we create more ability for ourselves to age in a healthy manner? So the more you can do early is great, but the great thing is the body is resilient to make some changes at any point. So balance, as we know, is one of those areas in health that can actually change quite profoundly. So I hope that helps a little bit. I won't linger too long because I know we have some other questions, but thank you, and hope that, type in something if you'd like to ask another part of that too. So I hope that helps.
Lauri, Brian is back in conversation with you. He says, just so you know, Lauri, I am a 69-year-old man currently training for my first marathon 2 weeks before my 70th birthday. And he says, best of luck on your PhD. He says, I was conferred with my PhD at 57.
Excellent. I love it. I love it. And I think that is part of it, is the desire to keep doing all of these things. I think some of you know I was good friends with Tao Porchon Lynch. She was the past president of the Yoga Teachers Association, which I was a number of years ago. But she lived over 100, and she started ballroom dancing when she was in her 80s. I think it was 70 or 80s. It was around the time I first met her. So the ability to try new things, I think that's fabulous with the marathon too, is really, really interesting to me. I think we're capable of a lot more than we sometimes know. We just have to approach it intelligently too. There is some information in the book as well. Like I said, I'm not pretending I know all this, but I'm sharing what's out there, peer-reviewed journals. As far as things like collagen and taking it in with things like bone broth, if you aren't vegetarian, about how some of that synthesis may help. So thank you, Brian, on all that. I'll let you go onwards, Elizabeth. I know you have more to ask there.
Yes, thank you, Lauri. From Allison Marsh comes the following question. Hi, Lauri. When working with women who are pregnant and early postpartum, for example, the first 6 months, what differences do you see in movement and emotions compared to women who are not in this phase of life?
That's an interesting question too. I used to work a lot of prenatal. Obviously, I have 2 grown boys of my own now. But it's interesting because we do know hormones, especially talking myofascially, affect things quite profoundly. So things like we talk about relaxin as being something we want in the body system, so you are able to birth a baby. However, the body doesn't always discriminate. So a lot of people, for example, come into prenatal yoga and they're wildly flexible in all sorts of places, but we don't want them to necessarily go to that hyper flexibility because you also need stability in there. So movement becomes different. You're kind of in, opening up to this, which you need to do for the birth process. But people working prenatally with anybody, you need both. That baby comes and it grows quickly, as any of us know who've had children. So your weightlifting sometimes scaled up quite profoundly. And as long as you're breastfeeding, you still have more relaxin in the body system, which is going to tend to make you go towards more mobility. So it's almost one of those things, like in any structure, we need that steadiness and that openness. We need a little bit more openness to birth the baby, but we still need strength. So playing with that. As far as the emotions, I'll just say for right now, the quick answer is to that the hormones affect emotions too, besides the profound nature of this process. And I think the more we study that in some way and give credibility to that, whether we're talking prenatal, postnatal, perimenopause, menopause, the better conversations we'll have around all of this, and also start to see some of the relationships of myofascial work with this. Maybe there'll be more intelligent body work, more intelligent movement work around these time periods of life. So there'll be more people trained precisely in them. So I'll say that for now. Yeah. Good.
And someone would like you to say again, the professor at the University of Padua, who's an expert in the hormone research and its effect on fascia, maybe spell it out so that they will.
Yeah, Caterina Fede. So with a C, Caterina, R-I-N-A at the end. Fede is very simple. It's F-E-D-E. And she works in Carla Stecco's lab. If you look, she has articles out there that are really rich information. High level of reading that, but hopefully you can dive into that. And those of you who enjoy that, hopefully that will be a good resource for you as well. Yeah.
Yeah, many thanks from the chat for that clarification.
All right, excellent.
A comment from Marcia Miller, who says, I think there's a theme here, Lauri. She says, I'm 73 and yesterday finished my certification for being an adaptive dive buddy, training people with disabilities to scuba dive.
Excellent.
Marcia Miller continues, got my educational doctorate at 51, dive master training in my 60s, definitely will purchase the book.
Yay. Thank you. And I'm supportive of all this. This is great. I love to hear all these great stories. Fabulous.
Resilience of all systems. Allison Marsh comes with a follow-up question. What can movement teachers do to help educate those who are still married to mainstream Western medicine ideals on myofascial?
This is a great question. Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead.
Yes, she says, thank you for your book and presentation. I share your enthusiasm for looking at the similarities between the body and nature.
Great. Thank you. Thank you, Allison, on many levels. This is actually a really interesting piece because this comes down to good science communication. And I think where a lot of times both scientists, movers, everybody, anyone who's passionate about their own topic sometimes forgets how to talk in communication with somebody else. And some of that involves just even learning a few of the basic terms of their world. I did this before I was guesting doing dissection at Rush Medical because I wanted to make sure I could communicate in different ways besides, doing my own unusual way of dissection, which is a very different from traditional, but you have to respect where they're coming from too. And I don't doubt that you're very respectful with this. But what I would say, what is very useful is get yourself books on science communication. Get yourself ideas of how to do this better. And I have a few of my own favorites that I'll recommend. Alan Alda, who many of you know, who might know from being, in MASH and being an actor and all of that. He has actually created a Center for the Communication of Science and being actually somewhere in New York. I won't say it. I forget off the top of my head. But he has a podcast, and I'm going to see if I can remember Clear and Vivid. That should be easy to remember. Clear and Vivid. And Alan Alda is somebody, he's written a couple of books on the topic as well of science communication. And he does this kind of from the point of view of his background as an actor. And how do you relate? How do you engage people? How do you think about communication? Because he started a science program a number of years ago. And in the very beginning, it was, according to him, it was pretty good from the start, but it tanked because he was trying to sound like he understood everything. And the moment he actually stopped and paused and asked the questions the rest of us were wondering if he would ask, and also got the scientists to communicate with clear ideas or metaphor. Well, why is this important? That changed conversation. And then he got so great at that he switched his kind of later in life career to being all about science communication. So I would say look to people like that too. He has some very fun ways to gauge. He has great podcasts. It will give you ideas too, that when you talk to other groups, to be open to listening and communicating in a really wonderful manner. I think that's a lot of it. Because again, sometimes, especially in myofascial world, we have all this great knowledge, but we're holding on to it, or we think, well, we already know this, why don't they? Instead of going, oh, why should I explain this to you? Why is it important? Why is it important to me or my client? And that shifts the conversation. So yeah, hope that helps.
Thank you, Lauri. Let's take a look at the slides that show people how they can order your book with a discount code and how people can follow and stay in touch with you.
Sounds great.
So We have Handspring is offering a 20% discount from the book, Lauri's book, The Myofascial System in Form and Movement. You can see on your screen that you use the code MTL for Move to Learn 1809 at checkout from Handspring Publishing. This code is good for the month through October 18th, 2023. That's MTL 1809. That's at checkout from Handspring Publishing.
And I'm just going to add one thing into that too, because if you already have the book, and I'm not trying to do selfish plug here or whatever. Oh, and some people's copyright last week. Great. Buy another book and give it to your local library, or give it to a program, or give it to somebody who might not be able to buy that themselves if you find value in it, because that's a really nice way to spread out the knowledge. I've heard of a lot of people, enjoying giving their local library or their local, practice of whatever, the book, so that they can spread it around that way. So I'll just add that in.
Wonderful, thank you. And the next slide shows how to stay in touch with and follow Lauri on Facebook, on Instagram, and she has 3 different channels on Instagram, so you can follow them all or choose your favorite.
Yeah, and I'll tell you a little bit, the Wellness Bridge has a lot of my pictures of either my travels or on the trail. So if you like the nature, and then it will have general stuff too. Myofascial System is, of course, mostly focused around the book. And Anatomy Bridge, I'm doing more with those images of art and dissection, and mostly historical pictures relating together. So I'm not on any of them all that much, but I will post different things sometimes in different places for that reason. Yeah.
Wonderful. And Lauri, where are you teaching these days? Are you leading anatomy dissection labs?
I am. I don't have the next one scheduled yet, but I have a couple that will be coming up soon. One with anatomic excellence, and I'll always post it on my website as well. I think we have, I forgot to maybe put the website on there. Is it? Yep, website, www.wellnessbridge.com. And by the way, there's free links to some of my older articles or info there too. But I'll usually put up the next lab up there. And I've been working with Anatomic Excellence, which we're doing labs down in Chattanooga. Beautiful state-of-the-art lab. I do labs together, KMR Labs with Leslie Kaminoff, more geared on our yoga pathway. And those are coming up. There'll be another one scheduled soon, either in Colorado Springs or San Diego. So just, stay in touch, kind of watch my info. That's the way I tend to put it out. I've stopped usually sending out email newsletters because I know for myself, I get overloaded and tend to unsubscribe to too many emails coming in. But you can check out some of my social media. I'll post periodically if there's something new coming up, or write me directly. Keep my email handy, and I answer people back. So if for some reason you don't hear from me, just send me another, shout out, because I will respond to people for sure. Yeah.
Beautiful. Thank you, Lauri, for being so available and such a generous leader of the field.
Well, thank you. That you have done a lot, quite a lot as well in this whole field, and it's lovely to get to know so many people in here too. So thanks.
Yes. Let's take a look at the next slide now, because although Lauri's webinar today brings our 2023 season with Handspring webinars to a close, we're going to circle back to the Memory Palace of Bones, a webinar featuring the authors David Lauterstein and Jeff Rockwell. And in October, I'm leading starting up a movement book club series in which participants will read and do the embodiments suggested in the book. And then I'll teach a movement class inspired by those particular sections of the book, and we'll have a discussion about your responses to it. So if this is of interest to you to follow up on the Memory Palace of Bones, there's a link that you can screenshot here and follow up on that. So with this, Lauri, thank you very much. Thank you, Handspring and Singing Dragon. And thank you, everybody, for being with us for this auspicious time together.
And thank you. I see some of the names too of some of the people who were in the book. And like I said, I have so many, I'm thankful to so many friends who were part of this in many, many ways. So check it out. And thanks to each and every one of you. Thank you.